I think one of the best critiques of abundance is that it sounds like a rationale for Trump's radical deregulatory agenda. And I do not sign on for that. I don't think anybody should. I think it's important that there is a kind of left version of abundance, which I think is important. I think the biggest question that the pro-abundance people have to answer, to me, is it can't be a pure deregulatory agenda, because we don't want to get rid of all environmental protections. We don't want to get rid of all labor protections, for damn sure. We don't want to let a single person like Robert Moses in New York impose whatever the hell he wants on every community around. So the question is, they got to find the right balance. On the other hand, do you want projects delayed 4 or 5 years or forever? No.
Yeah. So now what should the Democrats be focused on? Because they had a strong one single idea to run on in 2018, and that was, the Dobbs decision. But now running on taking Medicaid away in 2 years, because that's going to happen after the midterms, for probably most midterm voters, Medicaid is not the salient issue. So what do you think that would be more of a salient issue for the midterm campaign?
First of all, I think when you look at what happened in 2018, Obamacare, the repeal was very important. And while I agree with your premise that Medicaid isn't quite the target as the repeal of Obamacare was, remember, they failed to repeal it, and it still hurt them. I think within the Medicare SNAP and tax cuts for the very wealthy, there is a very strong argument that Trump has sold out all of the working class voters he claimed to represent. And I think the kind of decline in the Democratic working class vote, as you pointed out, was not simply the white working class. There was also sharp decline in the Latino working class, and to some degree among younger Black men. And I think that gives them a real opportunity to say, that he is not for you. This is phony populism. This is plutocratic populism. I think there are simple ways of making that clear. So I think that's important. I do think that a lot of Americans, and you've seen Trump's popularity go down, I think a lot of Americans are uneasy with the immigration plan. I think it's fascinating that in the polling, when you ask, do you approve or disapprove of Trump on the southern border, they approve because the border is quiet. If you ask, do you approve or disapprove of Trump on immigration, the numbers go negative. Why? Because they don't like this spectacle. They don't like sending people out of the country without having any rights at all. So I think, and especially in the Latino community, there's been some reporting lately that that surge that Trump enjoyed in the Latino community looks like it's ebbing. And so I think that's a second piece of it. And I think there are votes to be had there. I have been interested in and have some sympathy for Ezra Klein's abundance argument. And I don't think it's a complete thing. And I think, it needs to be filled out and supplemented. And abundance is probably not as good a word as plenty or some simpler word. I love the word abundance, but that does strike me as a $25 word.
That's a lot. That's
right.
Yeah. Well, just for people who don't know what the abundance agenda is, it's basically a critique of the Democrats and the Democratic Party, saying they're too caught up in their regulations to protect various interest groups, environmentalists, labor, et cetera, and they need to kind of cut through all that morass in order to actually build things like high-speed rail in California or more housing for low-income and homeless people, et cetera, et cetera.
I do think the idea of a hopeful future for the country. I've been thinking a lot in new frontier terms. That's what I started thinking about when I read Abundance, where we have all this technological know-how. We have all this inventiveness in the United States. What we need is a government that is capable of building things that takes advantage of this rather than try to throw out talent that wants to come into the United States. And it is also very aware that a lot of people have been left out of abundance. And so this is abundance for everybody. As I say, I'm still trying to figure out the answer to your question, like a lot of people are. But I think and even Mamdani embraced some of abundance in his campaign, and he talked about how if you are a progressive, you should be insistent that government works well because you are relying on government to make life better for people. And if government doesn't work, you are not keeping your core promise. So I think there's something there. And obviously, I think Trump's tariffs also open up a lot of potential because he didn't keep his promise on prices. Midterms will be easier to win on opposition. They're going to have to figure out an affirmative agenda for the 28 election. And I do think that, if you marry some of what Mamdani did with some of what the abundance folks have talked about, I think you might find a way to bring together this broad coalition that you need to get past 51%, hopefully do better than 51%. And I think it's important that there is a kind of left version of abundance, which I think is important. I think the biggest question that the pro-abundance people have to answer to me is it can't be a pure deregulatory agenda because we don't want to get rid of all environmental protections. We don't want to get rid of all labor protections for damn sure. We don't want to let a single person like Robert Moses in New York impose whatever the hell he wants on every community around. So the question is, they got to find the right balance. On the other hand, do you want projects delayed 4 or 5 years or forever? No. And so that is because I think one of the best critiques of abundance is that it sounds like a rationale for Trump's radical deregulatory agenda. And I do not sign on for that. I don't think anybody should sign on for that. On the other hand, the notion that we have made it way too hard to build things and that we need to find a way to speed up this process so that government can deliver to people and increase trust. I think that part of it is right. And you saw in the debate in California over the 2 bills passed recently, it's a hard debate. But they were trying to strike a balance in those bills.
They're carrying around copies of Abundance in Sacramento when they voted to get a big portion of CEQA, the environmental law. So it is obviously having an influence. And for all of you, join us again next week with Max Boot in conversation with Warren Olney to talk about Russia's war on Ukraine, Trump, Putin, Zelensky, and the search for peace. And I will be back with you again shortly. Thanks and have a great night.